consistently demanded a coherent diagnostic and implementable transport policy. The absence of such a policy framework has led to a serious deterioration in uncertainty and efficiency, culminating the embarrassing spectacle of state and private entities now aggressively jostling for passengers and fares across Jamaica. On April 20th, 2026, barely a month ago, the Oakhurst to Kingston corridor was plunged into chaos as bus operators withdrew their services. They were protesting against the state-owned JUTC, whose recent incursions into their licensed routes have been described as a direct assault on their livelihoods. These operators contended that JUTC is leveraging artificially low fares to create an unfair competitive environment, whittling away routes' revenue expectations. Madam Speaker, this act highlights the desperate need for a coherent policy. And it also begs the question, is it now the administration's intent to cherry-pick profitable routes from state takeover? Does the JUTC still hold an exclusive franchise for the KMTR under the Public Passenger Transport Act, where it is obligated to provide an adequate, safe, and modern service, or has it abandoned its original purpose? Furthermore, it is the same transport authority, by law, dictates fare structure. How can the government justify undercutting those very rates approved by the cabinet, effectively cannibalizing the route yield of the very same investors it has licensed? Madam Speaker, what can really go so, and how unjust can this government be? These are policy issues that the minister must address through the formulation of a comprehensive transport sector policy. So the very investor, financial institution, operator, worker, and importantly, the regulator can have clarity about the roles of all stakeholders in the industry. Without this, Madam Speaker, whatever is the minister's claim, the decline will persist and there will be no prospect of real improvement of transport service for our people. The minister must also be transparent about what he considers improvement under his stewardship. Is it the unchecked explosion of road license? The rampant chaos of taxis performing stage carriage functions? Or is it a race to the bottom where suppressed costs have sacrificed all meaningful service standards? I will leave it to Jamaica to determine whether this minister and the administration he serves have improved the transport sector or just making sweet-sounding announcements without real action or real improvements. Madam Speaker, let us all turn our attention to the JUTC. For a decade now, the JUTC has been languishing the hospital's accident and emergency department, left on a bench without a bed. They have called on a carpenter to examine the patient, when what is truly required is oxygen and a skilled physician to diagnose the ailment and prescribe the cure. Maybe we could have retained some Cubans for that. Madam Speaker, the JUTC is currently in its most pathetic state since its birth in 1998. The financial wreckage is undeniable. The JUTC has incurred cumulative losses of more than $100 billion over the last decade. A direct consequence of this administration apathy that has left the company in this pathetic state. Madam Finance Minister, listen. Imagine if we had wisely directed those precious taxpayers' dollars. Our nation would today boast a truly world-class transport network. Furthermore, under government's accounting standards, the massive subsidies granted to the JUTC are recorded as revenue, creating a deceptive veneer that masks the entity's true perilous financial condition. This financial toll is immense. A staggering $14.8 billion loss is projected for this financial year alone, with the entity remaining operational only through a $11 billion government grant. Madam Speaker, despite acquiring over 250 new buses, the JUTC farebox revenue, the acid test of performance, and the very lifeblood of its operation has remained largely stagnant or fallen, failing to reflect meaningful growth in any of the measuring tools: bus run-out, fleet availability, cycle trips, revenue, staff-to-bus ratio, and cost recovery ratio. The minister also needs to be reminded that fleet addition will never lead to higher fleet availability unless there is a fleet maintenance. The JUTC's daily operational dispatch remains stubbornly below 300 units, over 450 in 2016 when we were in government. This is a damning indictment, considering that with 250 new acquisitions and 170 older units, the serviceable fleet should stand at 420 buses. To illustrate the gravity of the crisis, Madam Speaker, yesterday, May 12, 2026, a mere 221 buses were deployed from all 3 JUTC depots to service the approximately 80 routes across the island. 450 is an optimal number. In his contribution last week, Madam Speaker, the minister made heavy weather of the 86% surge in charter revenue. The reality is that the fare of paying passengers have declined by 29% year to date, a figure that confirms JUTC remains comatose. The financial devastation has worsened as we look ahead to the 2026-27 fiscal year. JUTC's operating expenditures have skyrocketed to a massive $17.4 billion. This represents an unparalleled $7 billion spike compared with the previous period. Even as farebox and charter collections, the company lifeblood, very lifeblood, remains stubbornly stagnant and anemic at a mere $2.6 billion. 2024-25, it was $1.5 billion. 25-26 is estimated at $1.7 billion. This catastrophic outcome, with a paltry 16.6% cost recovery ratio. So out of every $100, it's only $16 that them basically hold on to. The catastrophic outcome, with a paltry 16.6% cost recovery ratio. In 2016, Madam Finance Minister, it was 60%. Is destined to be regarded as one of the JUTC's most pathetic performances. Given the overwhelming maintenance and administrative costs associated with fare collection, including hardware and software, and the staff requirement of cash handling, we find ourselves at an absurd crossroads. It may be more financially responsible for the government to offer the bus service free of cost and save money rather than maintaining this facade of charging fares for much longer. Madam Speaker, the moment has arrived for this administration to demonstrate genuine and earnest resolve to rescue the JUTC from its current peril. It is truly alarming that although 66% of the current fleet comprises newer units, repair and maintenance costs are set to increase by $3 billion, reaching a staggering $4.2 billion. This is a massive leap from the $1.3 billion recorded in the prior fiscal year. We have to ask what really have gone at the JUTC. The data is even more chilling. With the fuel allocation projected to rise by an unprecedented $1.3 billion. This is despite a fleet that is primarily powered by CNG and electric buses. This surge arrives even before the impact of global price shocks from the Iran conflict. We must ask what level of internal dysfunction is at play, Madam Speaker. What can really go so? What the minister has been doing is the very definition of sweet talking without substance or real improvement. Furthermore, the JUTC persists in its haphazard rollout of rural transport system, including coach buses. This strategy persists despite the lack of supporting data. This operation is bleeding millions in costs every month, while stagnant, anemic fare box revenue fails to cover even half the operating costs, while the KMTR routes remain underserved. We have called upon the administration time and time again, Madam Speaker, to answer the simple question: why has it taken so long for a national transport plan? What is the long-term vision to rescue and improve our public transportation system? We certainly did not hear it in the minister's presentation last week. This ad hoc patchwork approach, Madam Speaker, has proven to be a failure and will continue to fail both our long-suffering commuters and transport operators. I would like to share some Transport Authority data with my colleagues. In 2026, licenses were granted to 1,600 hackney carriage operators in the KMTR. In 2025, we have 5,200. 363 route taxi in the KMTR in 2016. In 2025, 2,466 route taxis. 12,000 route taxis island-wide in 2016. 20,275 route taxis island-wide in 2025. When you examine these numbers, Madam Speaker, a staggering 225% explosion in hackney carriage license within the KMTR over 9 years, together with a 168% surge in route taxis island-wide, reveals the gravity of the crisis. The Transport Authority is merely a cash cow with no interest in quality service. With no additional parking infrastructure, no rationalization of existing systems, and no coherent plan for public transport. Madam Speaker, how much longer must this nation languish before this promised transport plan be delivered? It is no wonder, Madam Speaker, that what is witnessed daily is chaos and mayhem in every town center across Jamaica, where both operators and commuters are crammed into cars as if it were the Middle Passage, relegating them to a second-class status. I will not dwell upon the escalating confrontations between law enforcement and transport operators. These skirmishes frequently endanger our commuters while projecting an image of public disorder and anarchy. Much of this systemic chaos, Madam Speaker, is a direct consequence of the clear deficit in parking infrastructure. It is the government's fault because the road traffic regulations cannot be fairly enforced in such an environment. Consider the sheer absurdity of doubling taxi license from 13,000, near 14,000 in 2016 to merely 28,000 in 2025, while providing no meaningful parking facilities or logistic support, Madam Speaker. This is the very height of governmental negligence, a move that effectively mandates the congestion and systemic indiscipline now choking every town centre across the nation. And before the mischief from members on that side, Madam Speaker, I am not an advocate for indiscipline in the public transport sector, but we must recognize some of the contributory factors that causes it. For several years, Madam Speaker, we have been promised the tabling of legislation to amend the Transport Authority Act, yet we are still waiting. This prolonged delay is yet another clear example of this administration's legislative lethargy and its persistent failure to deliver on meaningful reform. We have called for the review of the Road Traffic Act. Still, quite a few sections of the current RTA has not come into being. The demerit points, use of cameras have not yet come into being. Madam Speaker, I would like to propose a 10-point policy plan for the government's consideration. 1, restore bus capacity as a backbone of the KMTR system. The government should set a new clear minimum bus seat target for the KMTR based on peak hour demand and publish quarterly progress. Establish a workable taxi franchise system. It is a national necessity that we move with urgency to establish a functional and workable taxi franchise system in the KMTR. Any thorough evaluation of our transport industry must recognize the indispensable role of our committed taxi operators. And it is time we strategically integrate their service demands. Subsidize and incentivize upgrades. Establish a national modernization grant and loan facility through the strategic partnership with the DBJ and commercial finances. This mechanism should provide restorative finance and partial grants to operators who integrate in the franchise net framework and pledge to procure fit-for-purpose units. Establish a coherent and resilient fare framework. Madam Speaker, no discussion of public transport could be complete without mention of passenger fares. I am not an advocate for higher unaffordable fares, but the last increase of 35% took effect on October 15, 2023. 19% was given, and the remaining 16% was promised to take effect on April 1, 2024. On April 1, 2024, the then finance minister said it was too inflationary and canceled the fare order. Madam Speaker, the necessity of a predictable fare policy cannot be overstated. We must confront the reality. While many find high costs unaffordable, keeping rates artificially low without matching government subsidies result in systemic decline and a sharp drop in service standards. Jamaica requires a diagnostic fare formula that accounts for the harsh realities of fuel prices, labor upkeep, and inflationary pressures. A superior, more nuanced approach would involve institutionalizing regular data-driven reviews linked to national inflation metrics. Madam Speaker, this would dismantle the current facade in which the administration refuses meaningful adjustment while expecting operators to bear the burden of an inefficient system. This administration's timid strategy of persistent procrastination, effectively kicking the proverbial can down the road, offers no relief for either our commuters or transport investors. Time and time again, we have advocated for the mandate to determine public passenger fares to be transferred to the Office of the Utilities Regulation. 6, the creation of designated taxi parks, holding areas, and loading zones. 7, use more technology to manage the system. Jamaica should move towards an integrated public transport platform, cashless payment, real-time bus tracking, taxi and bus fare maps, digital routes licensing, passenger complaint tracking, data and passenger demand by route and time. Strengthen enforcement, but make it fair. Enforcement must target the causes of disorder, not just the symptoms. Police and Transport Authority operations should focus on illegal operations, overcharging, dangerous driving, illegal parking, and route breaches. The Transport Authority has warned operators against unauthorized fare increases, underscoring the pressure created when official fares do not cover operating costs. Enforcement must be paired with reform. You cannot demand order from operators while denying them proper routes, parking, fare adjustments, and business viability. Reform governance. The KMTR needs a single transport planning authority with real power to coordinate JUTC, route taxes, hackney carriage, municipalities, traffic management, and infrastructure. Right now, responsibilities are too scattered. Madam Speaker, these proposals may help to form the core of a national transport plan, a strategic long-term vision to salvage our public transportation system from its current state of decay. We on this side, Madam Speaker, move to the school bus and rural buses, have long championed the introduction of a robust rural school bus service, a vision I have previously articulated in these very walls during sectoral debates. The current iteration of the system has been hobbling along for over 6 months, launched after the Cabinet essentially handed the Minister of Transport a blank check to procure second-hand units. At that time, Madam Speaker, we cautioned this administration about the inherent limitations of these American-built buses on our roadways. The minister's response was to dismiss our concerns as bad mind. I must ask, Madam Speaker, will he finally be open with the Jamaican people? It would have been more prudent, Madam Speaker, for this administration to forge a strategic partnership with private investors within the public transport sector. A national school bus service must comprise a synergistic blend of both public and private entities, with a primary reliance on private operators to ensure island-wide efficiency. Implementing such a strategy would afford the administration the necessary fiscal space to desperately rebuild the JUTC, which is currently hobbling along. Madam Speaker, we need only to look to jurisdictions like Florida and New York, which successfully utilize a synergistic blend of public operators and private contracting, all while the state maintains rigorous oversight and safety monitoring. By leveraging private contractors, we can cut operational expenditures by 30 to 40%, while stimulating robust employment and economic growth across our nation. Consider the impact of establishing a specialized credit facility via the Development Bank of Jamaica or a comparable body designed to provide restorative financing and reducing interest rates as a strategic incentive for stakeholders to acquire fit-for-purpose vehicles. Madam Speaker, let us examine the first 6 months of this rural school bus service, which deploys 115 units across 13 parishes. According to the ministry's internal data, this emerging framework has already imposed a high cost to the national budget. Fuel costs amount to $126 million, $21 million in 6 months. Salary obligations totaling $252 million or $42 million every month. This culminates is a cost of $378 million in 6 months. And the figure does not include the ongoing maintenance liability, which is about $40 million a month. Yes, per month. No. I leave these numbers, Madam Speaker, for the Jamaican people and the government to consider, especially while viewed alongside over $100 billion in losses already incurred by the JUTC. The country is owed the courtesy of a national transport plan. Madam Speaker, we on this side put forward the right program, rural initiative for delivering education, a robust partnership with private operators designated to provide subsidized transport for over 30,000 school children daily across the length and breadth of the island, compared to the 15,000 under this administration. This vision deliberately targets vulnerable students who are forced to navigate multiple transit points just to reach a classroom, bringing much needed relief to their already struggling families. It is a plan that looks beyond simple town-to-town transit, reaching deep in those remote, forgotten communities that currently possess no official routes. Madam Speaker, I want to touch on ride-sharing. Madam Speaker, in a prior address to this House, I recounted the harrowing fate of Daniel Angling, the young educator whose life was tragically extinguished after she engaged in a ride-sharing service in May 2024. The discovery of her remains in Salt River stands as a grim indictment of this administration's catastrophic failure to regulate this rapidly growing industry. A full 12 months have elapsed since the minister stood in this House and solemnly pledged to enact an immediate legislative framework for ride sharing. Yet in this current session, we are met with another empty vow regarding a national policy that has allegedly received Cabinet's approval. A document the minister purports will form the backbone for regulating Jamaica's ride-hailing industry. The contradiction is stark, though. How could a legislative promise be made a year ago when the guiding policy remains non-existent? Can we truly expect the latest framework to finally manifest into actual law? I certainly hope we are not witnessing another year of just sweet talking, another cycle of hollow commitments, and a total absence of meaningful protection for the Jamaican people. While the minister slumbers on this matter of life and death, our legitimate law-abiding operators, the dedicated members of JUTA, JCAL, Maxi, and even our Hackney carriage operators are being strangled by systemic inertia. These essential stakeholders are bleeding financially because the government refuses to confront the ride-hailing crisis. It is a disgrace and represents a complete abdication of leadership. Before I assess the aviation landscape, Madam Speaker, it is only fitting that I pause to acknowledge the profound dedication and meritorious service of our aviation workforce. Their tireless efforts following Hurricane Melissa ensured that our vital air connectivity was restored at remarkable speed. Their steadfast commitment during that crisis is worthy of our deepest gratitude. I turn now to focus on airport operations and concession management, specifically the administration's short-sighted decision to securitize future airport cash flow. This move to monetize future revenue to address fiscal demands, including the Spark Road program, effectively mortgaged the future of the next generation. The 2024-25 securitization has pledged government revenues from both the Norman Manley International Airport and Sangsters International Airport, fundamentally altering the incentive structure of airport governance for years. The irony is stark, Madam Speaker. While airport funds are diverted to roadworks, the actual access to our airports and their logistic integration remains woefully suboptimal. This securitization creates a climate of future fiscal rigidity that we can ill afford. By grabbing these future concession cash flows today, Jamaica has surely restricted its future flexibility. We now face intense pressure to protect airport revenues at any cost, a situation that threatens to distort sound diagnostic policy. While the Airport Authority maintains a public commitment to modernization, the reality is a projected loss of nearly $200 million for this fiscal year, 26-27, a staggering decline from the $600 million surplus recorded in the prior year. The long-term repercussions are grave, reducing leverage to renegotiate concession terms, pressure on high fees, and a diminished ability to benefit from growing passenger growth numbers since future flows are already spoken for. While Norman Manley has seen some improvement, it remains commercially anemic compared to its future potential. Ian Fleming's remains strategically neglected, failing to mature into the regional gateway it was promised to be. Madam Speaker, I've sent out my speech, so we have made some recommendation in targeting tax incentives so that we can grow to improve the viability of our airports. I propose the creation of an airport economic zone policy to develop logistics, warehousing, and support the perishable exports. We must transform these terminals into genuine economic platforms. Madam Speaker, just quickly looking at the mining, the Minister spoke about the reopening of JUTC, which is about 5 years overdue. And, you know, I hope, Minister, that they resolved that you stood up in the House and spoke about action, that it is taken and not something that has been kicked down the road. Because, yeah, Madam Speaker, but we need to look at the mining sector, because for a decade and a half, Madam Speaker, we have been subject to the tired refrain that our bauxite reserve possesses a mere 24-year lifespan. We must demand a precise diagnostic assessment of the sector's true health. Concluding, Madam Speaker, the picture I have painted for this House today is not one of progress, but of peril. From a comatose state of the JUTC, hemorrhaging billions of taxpayers' dollars, to the chaos gripping our public roads, to mortgaging the airport authorities, revenue, and the tragic price paid for the administrative legislative lethargy on ride sharing. It all points to a single domain damning reality. This administration has chosen sweet talking over serious diagnostic governance. We have exposed the failures to plan, whether for a sustainable national school bus service or a modernized mining sector that truly serves its people. If the government continues to ignore the collapse of public transport and refuses to reform the mining sector, Jamaica's future is bleak. A nation cannot survive if public transport strangles productivity, traps the poor in cycles of lost time and wages, and widens the gap between urban and rural parishes. Workers are late, students are stranded, and commerce and industry have slowed. The economy literally bleeds every hour. And we have asked repeatedly, is there a plan? The clock is not merely ticking, it is counting down to a crisis. I implore this administration, abandon the patchwork fixes, seize the hollow commitments, and deliver the real action that the Jamaican people, our long-suffering commuters,
Madam Speaker, I would like to thank the member from Manchester North Western for his very excited presentation. I trust his colleagues. I did not hear the excitement yesterday, but we move on. We will have now the member from St. James Southern, who will make her presentation, Madam Speaker.
Oh, Shana, okay, good. Okay. You may begin. Madam Speaker, me get up this afternoon to make my first sectoral speech. For my portfolio. Hold on. Standing orders. And I think you are fully aware. And if I have to stop you again during your presentation, you will not get any additional time. No, and she knows. Standing order 6, page 3. When I speak to
your presentation and such, that's Spanish.
Madam Speaker, Leroy, allow me to speak. A leader. Madam Speaker, perhaps I should abandon that attempt to use our local language because I have been reminded of the linguistic conventions of this honorable House. Because maybe there is no more fitting way to begin a presentation on culture than to speak briefly in the language understood by the overwhelming majority of Jamaican people. Even if that language still struggles for full acceptance in some of our most formal national spaces, including this very parliament. So let me give you the Queen's English. Let me give you the Queen's English. At the outset, permit me first to thank the leader of the opposition, the Most Honorable Mark Golding, for the confidence he has placed in me through this portfolio assignment. I also thank my parliamentary colleagues, my councillors, my constituency and personal team, and the many people who support the demanding work of representation and public service every single day. Public life is never carried by one person alone. And I especially want to thank my parents, Miss Faye and Pastor Burchell, for instilling in me from very early a deep love for Jamaica, a deep respect for people, right, Roy? And a deep pride in our culture, particularly through faith, religion, community, and service. Much of what I understand today about identity, resilience, storytelling, and the spirit of Jamaican people began long before politics. It began in church. It began in my community. It began in school. It began in my yard. And permit me especially to acknowledge the people of South St. James who traveled all the way from country to town to sit in this chamber today to hear their MP deliver her maiden sectoral presentation. From Anchovy to Catadupa, from Maroon Town to Welcome Hall, from Springfield to Mount Carey, thank you for making the journey. Thank you for believing in me. The people of South St. James are not merely observers of Jamaican culture. We are carriers of it. We're protectors of it, builders of it. And I want them to know that every single day I walk in this house, I never forget what it means to represent you. I never forget where I come from. And I will fight every single day for the people of South St. James and for the dignity, the potential and future of rural Jamaica. I'm a country girl. Before I proceed into the substance of this presentation, permit me briefly to make an observation about the structure of our sectoral debates themselves. It would perhaps be far more useful to the country if the sequencing of these presentations allowed the Jamaicans first to hear from the sitting portfolio minister outlining the government's priorities, their achievements and proposed direction, and then shortly thereafter hear from the opposition spokesperson engaging those ideas directly, identifying the gaps, strengthening proposals where necessary, and advancing alternative visions where appropriate. That's developmental. Because the purpose of these debates should not merely be performance, political theater, or ritual. They should also function as developmental dialogue. And so in this instance, I speak before the country has yet heard from Minister Olivia Auntie-Babsy Grange herself. But permit me nonetheless to acknowledge her long-standing commitment to this ministry and the energy she has invested over many years in Jamaica's cultural and entertainment sectors. Pick up yourself, Auntie-Babsy. But in the absence of that sequencing, structure, I will use this opportunity not merely to critique, but to place on the table a broader national vision. Because culture, creativity, entertainment, and information cannot continue to exist at the margins of national development policy. They're not ornamental. They're not side conversations. They're not ceremonial add-ons. They are infrastructure, economic infrastructure, tourism infrastructure, employment, identity, digital infrastructure, soft power infrastructure, democratic infrastructure. And perhaps no country on earth proves that more clearly than Jamaica. Long before many countries knew our GDP, they knew our music. Before they knew our exports, they knew our athletes. Before they knew our population size, they knew our sound, our language, our creativity, our spirit. Jamaica is a cultural superpower with a developing economy. And that reality demands that we begin treating culture, creativity, and information not as peripheral concerns of government, but as strategic pillars of economic development and global influence. I'm going to speak to culture as infrastructure. For some people, culture is an event. For people like me, culture is how we survive. I come to this portfolio not only as a parliamentarian, but as a daughter of rural Jamaica, a daughter of South St. James, raised in communities where culture was not something carefully packaged and occasionally consumed, but something we lived every single day. We heard it in the churches, how we clap, how we dance, how we sing. We heard it in our music. We heard it in the marketplaces. We heard it in the sound systems drifting across districts at evening time. In the cadence of our elders' storytelling, in our revival meetings, in our zinc fence conversations, in the humor and resilience of ordinary Jamaican people. Before I ever studied communication academically at the London School of Economics, I experienced communication culturally. Before I ever understood branding professionally, I understood identity instinctively.